The twin suns of Zara hung low in the dusty sky, casting long shadows across the cracked dunes of the Kesari wastes. Smoke curled from the wreckage of downed skiffs and shattered war mechs, their metallic bones half buried in crimson sand. The battle had ended hours ago, less a victory than a mutual exhaustion. But the air still hummed with tension, like the silence before thunder. Commander Joran Vale stood at the edge of the encampment, his boots caked in ash and dried blood, scanning the horizon with tired eyes. He was lean but broad-shouldered, his face lined not just by age but by too many campaigns on too many worlds. His uniform, once sharp and navy blue, now bore the stains of plasma burns and sweat, yet he wore it with quiet dignity. Around him, human soldiers tended to wounds, sorted salvage, or simply sat in silence, too drained for celebration. Across the makeshift demilitarized zone, the Varelian delegation had arrived under banners of iridescent silk that shimmered like liquid amethyst in the fading light. They were tall, elegant beings with smooth purple skin that seemed to absorb the desert's heat without complaint, and hair as white as glacier ice, often braided with silver threads that chimed softly when they moved. Their armor wasn't forged, it was grown, living carapaces that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. At their center stood Princess Lyra Solenve, heir to the sapphire throne of the Varelian dominion. She stood taller than most of her kin, her posture regal even in fatigue, one hand resting on the hilt of a curved blade that glowed faintly at its core. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and the color of storm-lit violets, missed nothing. She had fought in the battle herself, leading a cavalry charge that turned the tide against the rogue mercenary fleet known as the Iron Maw. Now, she surveyed the human camp with cautious curiosity, her expression unreadable. Joran hadn't meant for anyone to hear. He'd been watching her from afar, mesmerized despite himself. There was something about the way she moved, graceful yet lethal, like wind over blades of glass. Her presence radiated calm authority, yet there was warmth beneath it, especially when she knelt to check on a wounded Varelian scout, her voice soft as she murmured healing incantations in her native tongue. Without thinking, Joran sighed under his breath. "Wow, she's gorgeous. I wish I had a wife like her." The words slipped out like steam from a kettle. Quiet, involuntary, born of loneliness more than lust. He'd been alone for years, ever since the colony raid on Helios 4 took his family. Since then, duty had been his only companion. But the desert wind betrayed him. Lyra's head turned sharply, not with anger but with surprise and then, unmistakably, amusement. Her lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. She didn't look away. Instead, she began walking toward the human lines, her guards falling into step behind her, their movements fluid and silent. Human sentries stiffened, hands drifting toward sidearms, but Joran raised a hand. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice steady though his heart hammered. He wiped his palms on his trousers and straightened his spine. When she stopped before him, close enough that he could see the fine silver flecks in her eyes and smell the faint scent of ozone and desert blossoms clinging to her skin, Joran felt his throat go dry. Up close, she was even more striking. Her features finely sculpted, her ears tapered like a cat's, and the subtle ridges along her jawline catching the last golden rays of sunlight. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke in perfect Terran standard, her voice melodic but edged with dry wit. "You speak loudly for a man who whispers." Joran blinked. "You heard that?" "I have ears," she said, tilting her head. "And, apparently, admirers." He flushed crimson, rubbing the back of his neck. I mean, I wasn't, it was just an observation." "An observation that included marriage?" she asked, one white eyebrow arching. Before he could stammer a reply, a sudden explosion rocked the eastern ridge. Dirt and fire erupted into the sky. Shouts erupted from both camps as figures in jagged black armor, Iron Maw remnants, swarmed over the dunes, their weapons crackling with stolen Varelian tech. Chaos broke loose. Lyra spun instantly, drawing her blade in a flash of violet light. "Ambush!" she cried in her own tongue, then barked orders in Terran. "Flank left! Protect the medics!" Joran didn't hesitate. He grabbed his pulse rifle and sprinted toward the nearest cluster of human soldiers rallying near a half-collapsed supply skiff. "Form up! Cover the Varelians! They've got our backs!" he shouted. What followed was a blur of motion and noise. Plasma bolts searing the air, the guttural roars of mercenaries, the sharp cries of the wounded. Joran fired with precision, his movements economical, born of years of combat. But it was Lyra who turned the tide again. She moved like lightning, her blade singing as it cleaved through armor and bone alike. At one point, she vaulted over a burning wreck, landed behind a mercenary commander, and drove her blade through his chest plate before he could raise his weapon. Then, without pause, she hurled a glowing discus-like device into the enemy ranks. It exploded in a burst of concussive sound that sent attackers flying like ragdolls. During a lull in the fighting, Joran found himself beside her behind a sandstone outcrop, reloading. Their shoulders brushed. He glanced at her, breathless. "You fight like a storm given flesh," she smirked, wiping blood, black, not red, from her cheek. "And you command like a man who's lost too much to lose anything else." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was knowing. He looked away, but not before she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. The skirmish ended as quickly as it began. The Iron Maw, realizing they'd underestimated the alliance, retreated into the labyrinthine canyons to the north. As the dust settled, medics from both sides emerged to tend the fallen. Joran helped carry a young Varelian soldier with a shattered leg to the triage tent. Inside, Lyra was already there, kneeling beside a human medic named Tessa, guiding her hands as she applied a biosealant to a deep gash on a private's arm. "Press here," Lyra instructed gently. "The clotting agent reacts faster with direct pressure." Tessa nodded, wide-eyed. "You're really good at this." "I was trained as a field healer before I was made heir," Lyra said simply. "War makes monsters of us all, but healing reminds us we're still people." Joran lingered in the doorway, watching. He'd seen commanders bark orders from the rear, seen nobles treat medics like servants. But Lyra knelt in the dirt, her royal silks stained with blood, her hands steady and kind. Something inside him cracked open, a door he'd welded shut years ago. Later that night, under a sky thick with stars unknown to Earth, the two factions shared a meal of ration bars and roasted sand lizards, a Varelian delicacy that tasted surprisingly like chicken. Around a central fire, stories were exchanged. Tales of home, of loss, of strange customs. A young human soldier joked that Varelian courtship involved reciting poetry while balancing on one foot during a sandstorm. Lyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and admitted it was mostly true. "Though," she added, glancing sidelong at Joran, "some of us prefer honesty over acrobatics." Joran, sitting across from her, nearly choked on his water. After the others drifted off to sleep, Lyra approached him where he stood watch on a dune overlooking the camp. "You don't sleep much," she observed. "Bad dreams," he admitted. "Or no dreams at all. Either way, silence feels safer." She stood beside him, arms crossed, gazing at the twin moons rising over the wastes. "On Varela, we believe silence isn't empty. It's full of everything unsaid." She paused. "Like your whisper today." He tensed. "I'm sorry if I offended you." "You didn't offend me," she said softly. "You surprised me. Humans rarely see past our skin. They call us cold, aloof, inhuman. But you saw something else." "I saw someone who fights for her people, heals the wounded, and laughs at bad jokes," he said. "That sounds pretty human to me." She turned to him then, her violet eyes searching his. "Do you truly wish for a wife like me, Joran Vale?" His breath caught. He hadn't told her his name. "My people listen," she said, as if reading his thought. "We remember." He met her gaze, no longer embarrassed, just honest. "I wish for someone who sees me. Not just the commander, not just the survivor, but the man underneath. Someone strong enough to stand beside me, kind enough to care when I fall, and brave enough to laugh in the middle of a war zone." He swallowed. "If that's you, then yes. 1,000 times yes." A slow, radiant smile spread across her face. "Good. Because in Varelian tradition, when a man speaks his heart aloud, even by accident, and a woman hears it, she has the right to claim his words as a vow." Joran's eyes widened. "You're not serious." "I am," she said, stepping closer. "But I won't bind you to a promise made in passing. Prove to me you mean it. Stay with my delegation as we return to the Oasis Citadel. Meet my people. Learn our ways. And if, after a moon's turn, you still see me as you did today, then we'll speak of vows properly." He stared at her, stunned. "You'd trust a human that far?" "You trusted me enough to cover my flank in battle," she replied. "Trust is a circle, Commander. You gave me one half. Let me offer you the other. The next morning, as the combined convoy prepared to move out, Joran stood beside his pack, watching Lyra issue final orders. She caught his eye and nodded just once, but the look between them held the weight of promises unspoken. As they marched into the rising sun, the desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time in years, Joran didn't feel alone. Beside him walked a woman with purple skin and white hair, who carried a sword in one hand and compassion in the other. And somewhere in the space between their footsteps, a new story began to bloom, fragile as a desert flower, but stubborn enough to survive the harshest storms. The journey to the Oasis Citadel should have taken 3 days. Instead, it took 6 because on the second night, the sand itself turned against them. It began with a low, subsonic hum that made teeth ache and bones vibrate. Then the dunes moved, not from wind, but from something beneath, a colony of burrowing predators known as scarvax, drawn by the scent of blood and metal. They erupted from the earth like living geysers of chitin and fong, their 6 limbs ending in scythe-like claws that shredded armor as easily as cloth. Chaos erupted. Humans fired blindly into the swirling sand. Varelians activated sonic emitters that sent piercing shrieks through the air, disorienting the beasts, but not enough. In the confusion, Lyra was dragged under. One moment she was shouting orders. The next, a scarvax tail coiled around her waist and yanked her into a sinkhole of shifting sand. Joran didn't think. He dove after her. The world below was a labyrinth of tunnels, hot and suffocating, lit only by the faint bioluminescence of the creature's inner membranes. He found her pinned beneath a collapsed tunnel wall, her leg trapped, her blade lost. Her face was pale, even for a Varelian, and her breathing shallow. "Go," she rasped. "They'll follow your heat signature." "Not happening," Joran growled, jamming his combat knife into the chitinous wall beside her and using it as leverage. With a grunt of effort, he pried the rubble aside just enough for her to wriggle free. She clung to him, trembling, not from fear, but from pain. He slung her arm over his shoulder and ran, guided only by instinct and the distant echo of gunfire above. They emerged hours later, half dead, covered in grit and blood, to find the camp decimated. 12 humans and 9 Varelians were dead. Among the fallen was Tessa, the medic who'd laughed at Lyra's poetry joke. Joran knelt beside her body, jaw clenched so tight it ached. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch feather-light. "She saved 3 children before the Scarvax took her," she said quietly. "She died well." He didn't answer, but that night, as he sat sharpening his knife by firelight, Lyra sat beside him and told him a Varelian morning song, a wordless melody that rose and fell like breath. He listened until his eyes burned, and for the first time since Helios 4, he let himself cry. When they finally reached the Oasis Citadel, it wasn't the gleaming palace Joran had imagined. It was carved into the heart of a colossal mesa, its towers woven from living crystal that pulsed with soft violet light. Waterfalls cascaded down its sides, feeding lush gardens that defied the desert's cruelty. But the welcome was colder than expected. High Chancellor Vexus, Lyra's uncle and regent during her father's illness, stood at the grand archway flanked by armored guards. His purple skin was darker, almost indigo, and his white hair was bound in severe knots. His eyes narrowed when he saw Joran. "You bring a human into the citadel?" he hissed. "After the Iron Maw used human mercenaries to slaughter our border outposts?" Lyra stepped forward, limping slightly but standing tall. "Commander Vale saved my life. He fought beside us. He mourns our dead as his own." "He is still an outsider," Vexus snapped, "and outsiders do not walk the sapphire halls unchallenged. By Varelian law, any non-royal seeking audience with the heir must undergo the trial of 3 veils, a test of worthiness held in the sunken arena beneath the citadel. It was rarely invoked anymore, considered archaic. But Vexus, sensing weakness or opportunity, demanded it. Joran agreed without hesitation. The arena was a vast, circular pit lined with obsidian pillars that hummed with ancient energy. The first veil was truth, a neural lattice that forced the participant to relive their deepest regret. For Joran, it was Helios 4, the screams of his wife and daughter as fire consumed their home, his own helplessness as he arrived too late. He wept openly, but did not break. "I carry them with me," he whispered to the empty air, "not as ghosts, but as reasons to do better." The second veil was courage, a simulated battlefield where illusions of his worst fears attacked. Iron Maw soldiers, Scarvax, even visions of Lyra dying in his arms. He fought them all, not with rage, but with resolve. "I protect what matters," he growled, driving his fist through a phantom mercenary's chest. "Even if it costs me everything." The third veil was compassion. Not a fight, but a choice. Before him appeared two figures, a wounded Varelian child and a dying human soldier, both bleeding out. Only one could be saved with the single medkit provided. Joran didn't hesitate. He ripped his own uniform sleeve, fashioned tourniquets for both, then used his body weight to compress their wounds while shouting for help. "No one gets left behind," he said fiercely. "Not on my watch." The arena lights blazed white. The crowd, Varelians who had gathered in silence, erupted in cheers. Even Vexus looked shaken. But the real twist came that evening. As Joran bathed in the healing springs of the royal wing, scrubbing sand and blood from his skin, a servant approached with a sealed scroll. It bore the Iron Maw insignia. Heart-pounding, Joran broke the seal. Inside was a data chip and a single line, "We know what you did on Helios 4. We know you weren't just late. You were ordered to stand down. And you obeyed." His blood ran cold. He had been ordered to hold position. His CO had deemed the colony expendable to draw out rebel forces. Joran had argued, begged. But in the end, he followed orders. By the time he disobeyed and went anyway, it was too late. That secret had haunted him for years. Now someone knew. Worse, the data chip contained footage, grainy but unmistakable, of him receiving the order. If this got out, not only would his reputation shatter, but the fragile human-Varelian alliance would collapse. Vexus would use it to paint all humans as betrayers. Panicked, Joran sought Lyra in the Star Garden, a tranquil grove where bioluminescent flowers bloomed only under moonlight. She was there, wrapped in a silver shawl, staring at the twin moons. He told her everything, his shame, his fear, the chip. She listened in silence. Then, without a word, she took the chip from his hand and crushed it beneath her heel. "I don't care what you did before you met me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I care what you do now. You chose to save me. You chose to mourn Tessa. You chose to treat a dying enemy with dignity when you found him gasping in the dunes last week." She stepped closer, her violet eyes blazing. "Your past is yours. But your future? That belongs to those who walk beside you. And I choose to walk beside you, Joran Vale." He stared at her, stunned. "Why?" "Because you see people," she said simply. "Not factions, not species, not even princesses, just people. And that," she added with a small, wry smile, "is rarer than a desert rain." Their moment was shattered by an alarm. A deep, resonant gong that echoed through the citadel. Vexus's voice boomed over the comms. "The Iron Maw has breached the eastern gate. They've taken the royal vault." Chaos erupted. But as Joran and Lyra raced toward the vault, a horrifying truth dawned. The Iron Maw hadn't come for weapons or credits. They'd come for the Heartstone, a living crystal that powered the entire citadel, grown from the first queen's soul. Without it, the oasis would die, and the desert would reclaim everything in weeks. Worse, Vexus was nowhere to be found. In the vault chamber, they found him, not fighting, but handing the Heartstone to a cloaked figure. The leader of the Iron Maw stepped into the light and removed his helmet. It was General Rael Torvin, Lyra's betrothed, declared dead in the Battle of Crimson Dunes 2 years prior. His purple skin was scarred, his white hair cropped short, his eyes hollow. "You were supposed to mourn me," he said bitterly, "not replace me with a human." Lyra recoiled as if struck. "Rael, you joined them?" "I built them," he snarled. "While you played diplomat, I forged an army to cleanse this world of weakness, of compromise. And now, with the Heartstone, I'll burn every human outpost from orbit." Joran stepped between them. "You're hurting her because you couldn't handle being forgotten?" Rael lunged. The fight was brutal, Varelian against Varelian, enhanced strength against tactical precision. Joran took a plasma bolt to the shoulder protecting Lyra, but kept moving, using the environment, overloading conduits, collapsing shelves, to disrupt Rael's rhythm. Finally, Lyra did the unthinkable. She shattered a support column with her bare hands, causing the ceiling to cave in between them. Rael escaped with the Heartstone, but not before locking eyes with Lyra one last time. "You'll regret choosing him," he spat. The citadel began to dim. The waterfalls slowed. The gardens wilted. With no time to waste, Lyra led Joran to the Chamber of Echoes, a forbidden sanctum beneath the throne room. "There's one way to restore the Heartstone," she said, her voice trembling. A bonding ritual. Two souls, willingly intertwined, can reignite its core. But it requires absolute trust. If either hesitates, both die. Joran didn't flinch. Then we don't hesitate. They stood on the central dais, hands clasped. As Lyra chanted in the old tongue, light poured from their joined hands into the cracked heartstone. Visions flooded them. Not just memories, but feelings. Joran's grief, Lyra's loneliness. Their shared hope, their quiet admiration. And in that moment, they didn't just see each other. They knew each other. The heartstone blazed back to life. The citadel sang. Days later, peace talks began. Rael's betrayal fractured the Iron Maw. Many surrendered upon learning their leader had lied about Varelian aggression. Vexus, disgraced, was stripped of his title. And in the rebuilt garden, under the twin moons, Lyra took Joran's hands in hers. My people ask if I will marry you, she said, her voice soft but clear. And what do you tell them? He asked, heart in his throat. I tell them, she said, smiling, that I already have in every way that matters. But the galaxy was vast, and peace was fragile. Rumors spoke of a new threat stirring in the Outer Rim, a coalition of warlords who saw the human-Varelian alliance as a threat to their power. And deep in the archives, a recovered Iron Maw log mentioned a weapon called the Silent Dawn, capable of severing neural bonds across entire planets. Joran and Lyra knew their story wasn't over. But as they stood together on the Citadel's highest balcony, watching the desert bloom anew below, they also knew this. Love wasn't the absence of danger. It was the courage to face it. Together, the peace lasted 17 days. On the 18th, a distress signal crackled through the Citadel's comms. A human colony on the ice moon of Vera 9, one of the few joint settlements established under the new alliance. The message was fragmented, desperate. They're not soldiers, they're children. But their eyes, oh God, their eyes. Before dissolving into static, Lyra and Joran boarded the royal skiff Whisper of Dawn within the hour. The journey took 2 days through asteroid belts humming with residual energy from old battles. Neither spoke much. Joran cleaned his rifle with methodical care. Lyra meditated, her fingers tracing the newly healed scar on her leg, a souvenir from the Scarvac tunnels. But tension coiled between them like a spring. They both knew. If this was another Iron Maw splinter group using child soldiers, it would test every principle they'd built their alliance on. Vera 9 was a world of endless white, glaciers stretching to the horizon, auroras dancing in violet and green across the sky. The colony, nestled in a geothermal crater, was eerily silent. No smoke rose from chimneys. No lights glowed in windows. As they stepped onto the frozen tarmac, their breath fogged in the air, boots crunching on permafrost. Then they saw the bodies. Not adults, not even teenagers. Dozens of small forms, frozen mid-stride, mid-scream, their skin pale blue, hair white as snow. But their eyes were solid black, like obsidian marbles. And embedded in each chest was a neural implant, still pulsing faintly. These aren't human children, Lyra whispered, kneeling beside one. They're bioengineered. Grown, not born. Joran's stomach turned. Like weapons. Worse, she said, her voice tight. Like vessels. A soft whimper echoed from the central dome. Inside, they found a single survivor. A girl no older than 8, huddled behind a broken console. Her skin was human pale, her hair dark brown, but her eyes flickered between hazel and that same unnatural black. She clutched a stuffed toy shaped like a 6-legged desert fox. It's okay, Joran said gently, crouching low. We're not here to hurt you. The girl stared at him, trembling. Then her gaze shifted to Lyra, and something in her expression changed. Recognition, fear, hope. You're the princess, the girl whispered in accented Terran. Mother said you'd come. Lyra froze. What's your name? Mira. She pointed a shaking finger at Lyra's chest. You have the same mark. Lyra's hand flew to the small, crescent-shaped birthmark just below her collarbone, a trait unique to the Solanve bloodline. Her breath caught. Who is your mother? Before Mira could answer, the ground trembled. From the glacier's edge, figures emerged. Not soldiers, but more children, dozens of them, moving in eerie unison. Their black eyes locked onto the trio, and behind them, striding with calm authority, came a woman in a long silver coat. Her purple skin faded with age, her white hair braided with mourning beads. Lyra went rigid. Aunt Soria? Soria Solanve, Lyra's aunt, presumed dead in the purge of the Western enclaves 20 years ago, smiled sadly. "Hello, little queen." Joran stepped in front of Mira instinctively. "Stay back." Soria raised a hand, not in threat, but in sorrow. "I didn't want it to come to this, but the Dominion left us no choice. When they declared my lineage impure for marrying a human, they exiled us. We survived in the outer dark, breeding hybrids strong enough to endure both worlds. But we needed a leader, one of true blood, untainted by politics." Her eyes fixed on Lyra. "You were always meant to lead us, niece. Not rule from a palace, but rise from the ashes." Lyra's voice shook. "You turned children into weapons." "I gave them purpose," Soria countered, "while you negotiated treaties with the very species that once bombed our nurseries." Joran felt Mira clutch his sleeve. "She made me forget my real name," the girl whispered. "She called me Vessel 7. But I remember, my father was human. He sang to me before they took him." Lyra's face hardened. "This ends now, Aunt. Release them." Soria sighed. "Or what? You'll fight your own kin? Kill children who don't even know they're being used?" The standoff stretched, brittle as ice. Then Mira did something unexpected. She stepped forward, holding out her toy fox. "I don't want to be a weapon," she said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I want to go home." One by one, the other children stopped. Their black eyes flickered. Some blinked. A boy dropped his plasma pistol. A girl began to cry. Soria's composure cracked. "No, you are stronger than this. You are the future." But the spell was broken. The neural implants sputtered, overloaded by the surge of raw emotion. Something Soria's cold programming hadn't accounted for. In the chaos, Soria lunged. Not at Lyra, but at Mira. "If I can't have the air, I'll take the symbol." Joran moved faster. He tackled Soria into the snow, pinning her as Lyra scooped Mira into her arms. The older woman struggled, snarling, but then went still. "You think kindness wins wars, Lyra?" she spat. "It only makes you vulnerable." "No," Lyra said softly. "Kindness ends them." They brought the children back to the Citadel. Varelian healers worked tirelessly to remove the implants. Human psychologists helped them reclaim their names, their memories. Mira, it turned out, was the daughter of a human engineer and a distant cousin of Lyra's, making her, technically, Lyra's second cousin once removed. She refused to leave Joran's side. "She reminds me of someone," he admitted one night, watching Mira sleep in the guest quarters, the toy fox tucked under her arm. Lyra leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Your daughter." He nodded, throat tight. Her name was Lena. She had the same stubborn chin. Lyra didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, she sat beside him. "Then maybe you can be the father now that you couldn't be then." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "And what about you?" She smiled faintly. "I've always wanted a sister." Weeks passed. The Citadel thrived. Gardens bloomed brighter. Children, Varelian, human, hybrid, played together in courtyards once reserved for nobles. Joran taught combat drills to older kids. Lyra held story circles where myths of both worlds intertwined. And every evening, they walked the Star Garden together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. But the galaxy had not forgotten them. A coded message arrived from the outer rim. The Silent Dawn wasn't a weapon. It was a ship, an ancient Varelian dreadnought, lost during the First Schism, rumored to carry a consciousness core capable of rewriting neural pathways across light years. And it had been activated. Worse, its last known coordinates pointed directly at Earth. Lyra stood before the War Council, her voice steady. "If it reaches Sol System, it won't just attack, it will unmake humanity. Erase memories, identities, love itself. Turn billions into obedient shells." Joran stood beside her. "Then we stop it before it jumps." "But the Dawn requires a Solinve bloodline key to deactivate," an elder warned. "Only the heir can board it." Lyra met Joran's eyes. "Then we go together." This time, there was no hesitation. No trial, just two people, bound by trust, stepping into the unknown. As the whisper of dawn launched into the starry void, Mira ran to the observation deck, waving until the ship was a speck of light. Behind her, the Citadel glowed like a jewel in the desert, a testament to what happened when enemies chose to see each other as people. And far ahead, in the cold dark between stars, the Silent Dawn waited, not as a weapon, but as a test. Because the real battle was never about firepower or bloodlines. It was about whether love, messy, fragile, defiant love, could outshine the silence of oblivion. And Joran Vale, once a man who whispered wishes into the wind, now gripped the controls beside a princess with storm-lit eyes, ready to shout his answer to the universe. The silent dawn did not fire. It did not erase Earth. It did not unmake love. Because when Joran and Lyra breached its obsidian hull and stood before the pulsing core, a sphere of liquid memory woven from the minds of 1,000 forgotten ancestors, they did not come as soldier and princess. They came as two souls who had chosen each other, again and again, through sandstorms and betrayal, through grief and revelation. Lyra placed her palm on the activation glyph. The ship demanded a command. Preserve or purge? She turned to Joran, her violet eyes shimmering with tears. It's asking me to choose my people, or yours. He took her hand, pressing it firmly against the glyph. Choose us, he said. Not Varelian, not human, just us. The core flared not with destruction, but with understanding. The ancient AI, designed to protect the Varelian legacy at all costs, recognized something it had never been programmed to expect. Unity born not of blood, but of choice. The silent dawn powered down, its systems folding into peaceful slumber. The threat was over. They returned to Zara as more than allies, they returned as symbols. The warlords of the Outer Rim, hearing how the dreadnought had bowed not to force but to compassion, laid down their arms one by one. Trade routes bloomed where battle lines once burned. Human engineers helped rebuild Varelian aqueducts. Varelian healers taught Terran medics bioresonance techniques that mended broken bones in hours. And in the heart of it all stood the Oasis Citadel, no longer a fortress, but a home. 3 months after their return, beneath the twin suns and a sky streaked with auroras, Joran Vale and Lyra Solanve were married in the Star Garden. There were no grand thrones, no gilded crowns, just bare feet on warm stone, hands clasped before a circle of friends, human, Varelian, and hybrid alike. Mira stood beside Lyra as her flower-bearer, scattering desert blossoms that glowed faintly in the twilight. Tessa's younger brother played a lute made of salvaged skiff metal. Even Vexus attended, humbled and silent, offering a single white orchid, the Varelian symbol of redemption. After the vows, as the feast began under strings of bioluminescent lanterns, Joran pulled Lyra close for their first dance. Still think I'm just a man who whispers too loudly? He asked, grinning. She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. Now you're the man who shouts with his actions. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Years passed, quiet and rich. They built a house on the Citadel's western rim, where the desert met the oasis, a place of open windows and shaded courtyards, filled with laughter and the pitter-patter of small feet. They had 3 children. Kalen, with his father's steady hands and mother's storm-lit eyes. Soria, named not for the aunt who fell, but for the hope she might have been. And little Lena, whose stubborn chin and wild curls reminded Joran so much of the daughter he'd lost, and the future he'd gained. Mira never left. She became a diplomat, bridging cultures with a wit sharper than any blade, and eventually adopted 2 orphan Scarvicridge children of her own, raising them in the same sun-drenched home where she'd first learned what safety felt like. Joran never commanded another battle. Instead, he taught at the new Academy of Shared Futures, where human cadets learned Varelian healing chants and Varelian youths practiced Terran engineering. Lyra ruled not as a distant queen, but as a gardener of peace, tending to alliances like rare desert flowers, giving them light, space, and time to grow. And every evening, without fail, they walked the Star Garden together. Sometimes they spoke of the past, the battles, the losses, the near misses. Sometimes they said nothing at all, content in the warmth of shared silence. One night, as their grandchildren chased fireflies that pulsed in sync with the Citadel's crystal towers, Lyra leaned into Joran's side. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't whispered that day in the wastes? He kissed her temple, his voice soft. I don't need to wonder. I'm living it. And under the endless stars of a world once torn by war, now stitched together by kindness, they lived, not just peacefully, but joyfully, with full hearts, tangled roots, and a love that proved even the most impossible divides could be crossed, one honest whisper at a time.